guys, it's Chelsea from The Financial Diet, and this week's video is brought to you by Squarespace. And this week, we wanted to talk to you guys about the questions that you may someday be asked when looking for a job that you're not at all required to answer, and in fact, probably shouldn't. Some of these questions are not outright illegal, but could lead to serious discrimination suits if someone were to pursue them against the hiring company. It's important when you're looking for a job that you know your rights and you set your boundaries. Especially when looking for your first job out of school, you can feel so excited at the prospect of getting any job that you don't even feel like you need to question the means of getting there. But the job interview process, while a lot of it is in the hands of the person doing the hiring, is not a moment of total powerlessness for the person who's applying. You have every right to be discerning about the kind of things you say to a potential employer and the kind of things that are asked of you. So we're going to go into some of the questions that you might hear and what to do when you're asked them. The first question is, are you married, pregnant, thinking about getting pregnant? So this is one of those lines of questioning that actually is in many cases against the law. There are many discrimination laws set in place, and some might vary state to state, but some are also federally mandated, that are there to protect people who might be vulnerable to discrimination in the case of hiring. And that could be based on ethnicity, gender, race, cultural background, religion, etc. But it can also be based on life choices one might make. In the case of women, that choice could be, do we think you're going to have a kid in the next few years, and how is that going to impact our bottom line? You not getting hired or promoted at a job because your employer thinks that you might have a kid someday is super against the law. It's also, just on a personal level, incredibly uncomfortable to be asked this as a woman, because we know all too well that these questions are not often posed to men, even though realistically it takes two parents to make a kid. Do not feel that you have to apologize to be a young woman who might be of marrying or childbearing age, nor that you have to justify or explain any future life choices you might make. If you're ever asked any of these questions around your relationship or childbearing status in the interview, even if it's posed in a casual way, be on the lookout. And one very good way to respond to this that is professional and respectful, but still very clear about setting boundaries: I prefer not to discuss details of my personal life, but I can assure you that I will fully commit and confidently meet the requirements of the position. We'll link you guys in the description to some of the specific laws protecting women who might be getting married or pregnant in the next few years around their employment. Knowing your rights in the workplace is incredibly important, and it starts even before you get the job. Number 2 is, how many children do you have, or how old are they? Now, this one is similar to the first, but a little bit different in the sense that the rules outlining what is and isn't okay to ask about someone's children are a little blurrier. It can be harder to prove that these kind of questions were used to potentially discriminate against someone. But it's also very important to consider the context of this question. We know that in the workplace in America, the way women are regarded as parents is very different from the way men are in a similar situation. We're the only developed country without guaranteed maternity leave, and although the situation has improved for working mothers, when surveyed, people are more likely to assume that the responsibility for child rearing should fall more toward the mother than the father. In fact, studies show that when men become fathers, their earnings over the course of their career actually increase. And the opposite is true for women. Having children is an enormous hit to a woman's earning potential, and that only increases the more children she has. And this is as much to do with people's expectation of her at the workplace, i.e., why aren't you home more with your kids, combined with why aren't you staying as late as the men, which is an unwinnable game, is a huge part of this. So asking a woman around the number of children she has or whether she has them in a job interview is a good way for an employer to suss out pretty quickly how much that will be a real or perceived constraint on her time. And you don't have to answer this. If and when you're asked this question, here's a good way to respond. I prefer not to discuss the details of my family, but I can assure you they are all supportive of my commitment to my professional life. Number 3 is, do you have any religious holidays you celebrate? Now, this is an inappropriate question for 2 reasons. One, it's a way for an employer or potential employer to pry into your religious life, which actually is discriminatory, but it's also a way for them to assess whether you'll be taking additional days off that are not on their regular calendar. Whether you celebrate Christmas, Yom Kippur, Ramadan, or nothing at all, that is not your employer's business. You have the freedom to practice whatever religion you want at the workplace, and more importantly, to not be judged on that criteria when you're looking for a job. If you sense that an employer is prying into your religious background, and this can often be the case for candidates who might outwardly appear to belong to a certain religion, remember that you have rights in this situation. And your biggest one is to not play that game. If and when you might be asked this question, you can simply respond, I am available to work the job as it was listed, and my religious beliefs and any holidays will not affect that. Obviously, if your religious beliefs would actually preclude you from doing a job as it was listed, you probably shouldn't be applying for that job. But in most cases, your religious beliefs and any holidays therein should not be a factor. The 4th question is, do you have any disabilities or any questions around a possible disability. Now, it should be clear that some jobs do have physical requirements that need to be met in order to do the job. And sometimes applications will ask you questions around your strength, mobility, etc. Let's say, for example, a job requires you to transport heavy objects or run or perform physical tasks. And in those cases, it's up to us to be realistic about what we can and cannot do. But for the majority of jobs, your physical abilities should not be a consideration in the hiring process. And there are plenty of discrimination laws in place to protect Americans with disabilities. And for the record, these protections can also apply to people who are mentally disabled as well as physically disabled, although physical disability often leads to more frequent discrimination. Particularly if you have a visible disability that might attract more questions than usual, it's important you know your right not to answer them. Any disability that does not literally prevent you from doing the tasks required of the job should not be a consideration. And more importantly, when setting our own boundaries for things like our physical or mental limitations, it's important that we remember that we are not on the defensive. These are rights, and it's well within your right to assert them. If you are asked this question or a similar one, remember there are plenty of options to respond, including, "I'm very confident that I am capable of all the requirements of this position." And remember, as with being asked other discriminatory questions, it is always within your right to bring these issues to the proper government body. We'll link you in the description below on how to report some of these issues if and when they arise in your workplace. Lastly, number 5, were you born in the US? Were your parents born in the US? Any question that hints toward your immigration status, your citizenship, your cultural background, or ethnic background is not okay. As long as you are legally within your right to be working in the US, you have no reason to be questioned on these issues. And while you may be asked to confirm on an application or in person that you are legally allowed to be working in the US, and an employer has the right to ask that question, anything beyond that is not okay. Just because you may appear to have a certain background or nationality is not at all a reason to be discriminated against for a job. An employer is not allowed to directly ask you where you were born or where your parents might have been born. And the distinction between the two, whether you are legally allowed to work somewhere or whether you may be from somewhere else, are very, very different. Particularly as the rhetoric around immigration and immigrants becomes more and more hostile, this may be an increasingly severe issue in job applications and workplaces. If you sense at all that you have been discriminated against in this way or are being asked unfair questions, you have every right not to respond or to report it. And if you do respond, here's a great option. I would prefer not to discuss my background in a professional setting, but I am legally able to work in the US. Beyond that, your background is, survey says, none of their business. There are many more questions than these that are definitely not okay to be asked when you're applying for a job, and we'll link you to more of them in the description. But in the short term, it's important to remember when you're in the job application process, which can feel often very desperate, that you are not in a position of powerlessness. Know your rights, assert your boundaries, and always be professional and respectful, but do not give in to something that's not appropriate to be asked for. And one employer you can be sure will never ask you inappropriate questions is yourself. If you've been thinking about possibly starting a side gig or a new stream of income, one of the best ways to get your website for it off the ground is with Squarespace,
which lets users create custom websites or online stores with its all-in-one platform. If you're looking to make your next move on a business idea or want to launch a creative project, check out Squarespace. With award-winning templates and 24/7 customer support, you'll have everything you need to create a website, build a portfolio, design an online store, and more. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, musician, artist, or designer, make your next move by visiting squarespace.com and use the code FinancialDiet for 10% off your first order.
As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to come back every Tuesday and Thursday for new and awesome videos.